Hello there. Tonight we're diving headfirst into the murky, shark-infested waters of international politics. Buckle up because it's about to get messy. Our story takes place in a world locked in a perpetual tug-of-war between two nations, the Democratic Republic of Liburnia and the, let's call it strongly opinionated, autocracy of Vostokria. Now imagine a leader who swoops in promising peace, a veritable dove among hawks. Meet President Adrian Voss of Liburnia, a man whose smile could melt glaciers and whose speeches could lull a room full of insomniacs to sleep. Elected on a platform of peace and diplomacy, Voss assured his citizens that he, and only he, could end the generations-long conflict with Vostokria. Peace is the only option, he'd bellow, shaking his fist not at Vostokria but at the very concept of war itself. His supporters, bless their cotton socks, ate it up. They plastered his face on everything from coffee mugs to those weird inflatable tube men you see at used car dealerships. Voss was more than a president, he was a symbol of hope, a beacon of tranquility in a world teetering on the brink. But, and this is a big but, things were not as they seemed. Behind that charming smile and those soothing words lurked a truth so shocking, so utterly absurd, that it would make your eyebrows climb off your forehead and set up camp on the back of your head. You see, President Dove, champion of peace, had a teensy-weensy secret, a secret so big it could make a hippopotamus say, well, that's a bit much, isn't it? Voss, the man who campaigned on a platform of peace, was in cahoots with Vostokria. Yes, you heard that right. President, let's all hold hands and sing. Kumbaya Voss was secretly taking orders from General Orlov, the iron-fisted ruler of Vostokria, a man who looked like he gargled with gravel and whose idea of a relaxing afternoon involved watching tanks crush rusty cars. Under the very noses of his adoring public, Voss began to subtly yet effectively dismantle Liberian defenses. He slashed military budgets, claiming that money doesn't grow on trees, people, we need it for schools and hospitals. He recalled troops stationed at the border, stating that their presence was unnecessarily provocative, and that we should be building bridges, not walls. Now while these statements might sound reasonable on the surface, they were about as genuine as a $3 bill. Voss, following Orlov's playbook, was weakening Liberian security, making it ripe for the picking. Enter our unlikely heroes. Cynthia Walker, a tenacious journalist with a nose for a story and a healthy distrust of anyone with perfectly coiffed hair, and Agent Mark Olson, an intelligence officer who believed in three things: his country, black coffee, and the unshakable feeling that something was deeply, deeply wrong. Cynthia, while investigating what she thought was a boring story about government contracts, stumbled upon some discrepancies. Discrepancies that, when you poked them with a stick, screamed, wait a minute, why is the Liberian government buying military-grade fertilizer from a company owned by General Orlov's brother-in-law? Meanwhile, Agent Olson, while sifting through mountains of intelligence reports, noticed a pattern of unusual troop movements and communication intercepts. The more he dug, the more he realized that someone, or something, was playing a very dangerous game with Liberian security. And the pieces all seemed to point back to the president's office. As Voss continued his charade, Vostokria, emboldened by his actions, grew bolder. They began annexing territory, claiming that these regions historically belonged to them, and that they were simply righting past wrongs. The international community, caught in a web of diplomacy and self-interest, floundered. Some condemned Vostokria's actions, issuing strongly worded statements that, let's be honest, wouldn't scare a toddler. Others, citing complex geopolitical realities, sat on their hands, hoping the situation would magically resolve itself. Meanwhile, Voss, the great peacemaker, urged his people to remain calm, assuring them that everything is under control and that violence is never the answer. He even had the audacity to propose a peace summit with General Orlov, a move that was met with equal parts confusion and facepalms from anyone with a brain. Cynthia and Agent Olson, now working together, found their paths converging. They realized they were chasing the same story, a story that could bring down a president and expose the truth about Liburnia's perilous situation. Their investigation led them down a rabbit hole of shell corporations, coded messages and secret meetings, each discovery more shocking than the last. They faced threats, attempts to discredit them, and even attempts on their lives. But they pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and a healthy dose of we've come too far to back down now. The evidence they gathered was damning: bank transfers, intercepted communications, and even photographs of Voss meeting with Orlov in a dimly lit back room looking less like a peace summit and more like a mobster negotiation. The walls were closing in on Voss. The evidence was mounting, and the public, once so enamored by his charisma, began to see the cracks in his facade. The dove, it seemed, had flown too close to the sun. Sensing his imminent downfall, Voss, in a move that surprised no one who had been paying attention, did what any sensible, peace-loving leader would do. He fled the country. He boarded his private jet, presumably headed for a relaxing vacation filled with cocktails and self-pity on a remote island with no extradition treaty. Oh, but it gets better. Because Voss, in his infinite wisdom, didn't just flee, he fled to Vostokria. Yes, you read that right. The president who had spent years undermining his own country's security, the man who had sold out his people for a few pieces of silver, decided to seek refuge with the very people he had been secretly working for all along. You couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. Now you might think that General Orlov, a man who collected tanks like others collect stamps, would welcome Voss with open arms. You might imagine a warm embrace, a hearty slap on the back, and a toast to a job well done. But you'd be wrong, because Orlov, as it turned out, was not a man who believed in keeping his end of the bargain. In fact, Orlov had about as much use for Voss as a screen door on a submarine. Voss, you see, had served his purpose. He had weakened Liberian from the inside, paving the way for Vostokria's expansion. He was a used napkin, a discarded pawn, a puppet whose strings had been cut. Upon arriving in Vostokria, Voss was promptly arrested, accused of espionage and treason against Vostokria. That's right, folks, the man who had betrayed his own country was now being betrayed by the very people he had betrayed his country for. Irony, as they say, is dead, and it's lying in a ditch somewhere wondering how it got mixed up in this whole mess.